Hello, this video is about a corpus-based research on writing for research publication. This research was done with Anna Sianova and Doug Biber. Our research goals in this research was to explore the discourse style of writing for research publication with respect to disciplinary variation, intertextual variation, and L1 LX expert writing. We used the term LX proposed by Jean Doualet to refer to scholars whose first language is not English. The corpus we used in this research comprises empirical research articles from 10 disciplines. We started with 20 disciplines, but after going through the steps, which I'll describe below, we decided to focus on articles in 10 established disciplines. Building the corpus took several months because it involved a sort of cyclic process that ensured the representativeness of the corpus. To build a representative corpus of writing for research publication, it was necessary for us to first specify the characteristics of the target articles that were to be included in the corpus. The first step was to identify the type of articles. We conducted a survey of high-ranking journals to identify the type of articles they commonly published. Now, we focus on only full-length articles because short pieces such as book reviews, commentaries, notes, and responses were not the focus of our research. We then characterized full-length articles based on whether A, they included quantitative/qualitative data analysis, B, presented a new model or formula that's analyzed and tested through various analytical procedures, or C, focused on theories and theoretical aspects of the field without the inclusion of data. We didn't include the articles that belong to the C category because our study focused on research papers and not theoretical articles. And in cases we were in doubt about the type of an article, we decided to discard it to be on the safe side. For example, in certain disciplines such as physics or chemistry, we found that writers often make theoretical arguments regarding the validity or accuracy of an established formula or model and present various data analysis to prove their point. Such articles kind of have characteristics of both theoretical and empirical article, and so they didn't fit clearly into either category. So we did not include them in the corpus. The second step in designing the corpus was to examine the internal structure of the articles. We found empirical articles either included the content of the standard four-part structure of IMRD sections, or they contained a different, rather distinct sectioning format. But the first tag category was more common. So for consistency, we didn't include the articles that belong to the second category. Also, some articles in certain disciplines, for example, chemistry, contained either fully integrated or fully separated results and discussion sections. We made sure to include only those that had fully separated R&D sections. And that was because R&D sections could perform distinct discourse functions and different communicative purposes. So it was important to maintain the distinction between the two sections. The third stage of the sampling was to verify the status of authors as either L1 or LX users of English. In this research, we were curious to know if there are systematic differences in L1 and LX expert writing. A sampling method that's commonly used in this area is Wood's 2001 method. Wood's method is based on two criteria: broad and strict criteria. The broad criterion focuses on the name of the first author to distinguish between L1 and LX written texts. The second criterion, however, uses not only the name of the first author, but also their institutional affiliation. This method has been used in many studies today, but it's not entirely foolproof. So we decided to sort of optimize the process of distinguishing between L1 and LX written articles by implementing the following steps. First, we examined all authors' first and last names, so we didn't limit ourselves to only the name of the first author. Second, each author's institutional affiliation was examined. If A and B revealed that the article was multinationally authored, we discarded it. If A and B confirmed that the article wasn't multinationally authored, we emailed the corresponding author of the article and requested clarification on the linguistic profile of the authors involved in drafting the manuscript. If the corresponding author confirmed that all the authors whose names were listed in the article were native speakers of English, the article was considered for inclusion in the corpus as a L1 authored article. We followed the same procedure for LX authors, meaning that if the corresponding author confirmed that all authors were non-native speakers of English, the article was considered as a LX authored article. Figure 1 and 2 are examples of the articles that were included in the corpus as L1 and LX authored papers. Figure 3, on the other hand, is an example of multinationally authored articles that were not included in the corpus. Here's the composition of the corpus. We made sure that the corpus was balanced. Okay, let's move on to multidimensional analysis. We conducted multidimensional analysis on the corpus. If you're not familiar with multidimensional analysis, in a nutshell, multidimensional analysis is essentially factor analysis done on linguistic data. If you're interested to know about MD analysis, I recommend reading Biber 1988, which is based on Doug's PhD thesis. It's got almost everything you need to know about MD analysis. There is no time to discuss the analysis here, but the steps we took to conduct the analysis are mentioned in the slides. If you had any questions about the analysis, feel free to email me. My email address is on the first page of these slides. Our MD analysis revealed 3 dimensions of variation. The first dimension appeared to distinguish communicative situations that require evaluations and elaborations from discourses with a high informational focus. So we label this dimension evaluative and elaborated versus informational focus, informational discourse. This was based on a functional interpretation of co-occurrence patterns among these features. These details are explained in the paper, but to give a quick explanation, these features are identified statistically using factor analysis. Now, it's important to note that these features and their statistical co-occurrence patterns are generalizable if your corpus is generalizable. If the corpus is not, then those statistical patterns are suspect, which is the reason why we spend so much time on designing and building our corpus. Once we have the results of the factor analysis, we then try to figure out why is that these linguistic features tend to co-occur in certain communicative situations, and what are the underlying functions that they tend to perform by their co-occurrence. This will lead the researcher to a functional interpretation of the dimensions and their labels. So basically, in a multidimensional analysis, a functional interpretation tries to capture the functions shared by certain co-occurring features. Now, you might disagree with our functional interpretations, and that's fair. You should evaluate these functional interpretations, but if you disagree with the functional interpretations, that doesn't make the factors, i.e. dimensions, go away, because those co-occurrence patterns are statistically identified without any presumptions on the part of the linguist. Let's see how the first dimension distinguishes between text categories in our corpus based on their discourse style and communicative purposes. Let's start from the left-hand side of the figure. As you can see, there is a sort of dichotomous relationship between the discussion and methods section. Overall, discussions are scored high on this dimension, while methods had a low meanness score. This shows that writing in the discussion section demands evaluation and elaboration, while the discourse of methods is extremely impersonal and primarily focused on communicating factual information. Continuing towards the middle of the plot, we notice that these patterns are affected by disciplinary specificity. If we look closely, we see discussion of findings is the only part of the research article in which authors in the hard fields tend to heavily rely on evaluation and elaboration features. In contrast, in the soft fields, not only discussions, but also introductions and results are substantially more evaluative and elaborated compared to the hard sciences. Moving on to the right-hand side of the plot, we can see a substantial difference between L1 and LX expert writing in discussions. More specifically, Dimension 1 appears to show that discussions produced by L1 English writers contained a higher degree of evaluation and elaboration compared to LX English authors. Now, please note that all the differences I've mentioned so far were statistically significant in our post hoc analysis. Let's move on to Dimension 2. We label Dimension 2 conceptual and abstract versus concrete language. As I mentioned, this was based on detailed considerations of these features and the communicative functions they share. Dimension 2 points to some differences across IMRD sections. The discourse of both introduction and discussion sections seems to be more conceptual and abstract than methods and results. But if we look at the patterns in the middle of the plot, we can see that not just introductions and discussions, but also methods and results in the soft fields scored high, which suggests that writing these sections in social sciences and humanities is characterized by arguments that primarily perhaps focus on describing conceptual and abstract entities. In contrast, all sections with negative scores on Dimension 2 belong to the hard sciences, which indicates substantial variation in the language of these sections across hard and soft knowledge fields. Our post-hoc analysis showed that hard and soft fields significantly differed in each of these sections, in each of the 4 sections, IMRD sections, on Dimension 2. With respect to possible variation between L1 and LX expert writing, we found no systematic differences between the two groups of writers on Dimension 2. Dimension 3. We label Dimension 3 pastime procedural discourse based on the co-occurrence patterns among the positive features, which mark a kind of a sort of form of discourse that's concerned with narration of procedures, analytical steps, and specific research activities in past tense and with frequent use of passive voice. Variation patterns along this dimension are very straightforward. As you can see, methods sections scored high on this dimension, but methods written in the hard fields scored even higher compared to methods written in the social sciences and humanities. Other sections across hard and soft fields are very comparable in terms of their score on this dimension. Result sections in both fields show intermediate scores, suggesting that writing these sections may also rely on some of the positive features of this dimension. Dimension 3 shows no substantial differences between L1 and LX authors. So overall, Dimension 3 appears to not only distinguish the discourse of methods from those of other sections, but also highlight disciplinary specificity in fulfilling the communicative purposes of this section. Synthesis. Now, our aim in this part of the study was to bring all 3 dimensions together. So far, I've explained the results with respect to each dimension, but characterizing registers and text categories based on one dimension would potentially result in an incomplete description. For example, if we go back to dimension 1, we see that methods scored low on this dimension, which points to the highly informational discourse of this section. But if we look at dimension 3, we see method section is scored high on this dimension, which, as I explained, suggests the procedural discourse of this section. So these dimensions are sort of interrelated, and if we consider the characterization of method sections only in terms of one dimension, then our description of research writing in this section would be incomplete. So let's consider characterization of IMRD sections with respect to all three dimensions. The dashed line in this plot represents the overall corpus mean with respect to the three dimensions. It kind of works as a benchmark here. So starting with introductions, you can see that this section scored higher than corpus mean on dimension 2, but lower on dimension 3. If we examine the other sections like this, we can provide a preliminary typology of research writing in IMRD sections. Based on this, for example, we can say the discourse of methods sections tends to be highly informational, and its focus is mainly on communicating factual information and narration of activities and past events. And such a discourse is typically created in passive voice. But this typology can be misleading because it doesn't account for the impact of disciplinary specificity. In this plot, the mean dimension score of each section is considered as a benchmark. As you can see, introductions in humanities and social sciences are characterized by their evaluative and elaborative discourse, while these sections in the hard fields typically have an informational focus. In addition, only the introductions written in the soft fields are marked as being highly conceptual and abstract, suggesting that the discourse characteristics of these sections can considerably vary depending on disciplinary preferences. There's no time to explain these for the other sections, but the differences shown in this plot in general demonstrate that characterizing research writing across IMRD sections without careful consideration given to disciplinary influences could result in, let's say, tentative conclusions at best. With regards to L1-LX English scholars' writing practices, there was only one dimension that's significantly associated with systematic differences between L1 and LX expert writing. As I mentioned, this difference was significant only in this discussion sections and related to fulfilling the communicative purposes related to the evaluation and elaboration of research findings. Now, genre analysis studies have shown that the rhetorical purposes of the discussion section often include interpretation, elaboration, and validation of research findings. Let us inquiry 2010 found that fulfilling such rhetorical functions is particularly challenging to non-Anglophone authors. Our results suggest that writing discussions and the communicative demands associated with evaluation and elaboration of research findings can shed light on systematic differences in research writing practices of L1 and LX English scholars. Now, it's important to note that corpus-based research on L1, LX writing is still quite rare. Most studies on this topic have used qualitative assessments that typically draw on survey-based and ethnographic methods. Future corpus-based studies could adopt a multi-perspective approach we use in this study to shed further light on this topic and also other aspects of research writing in academic context. Thank you very much for watching.